Honor. Singde.
Can you hear me?
Toz mader chache. The Garsura the Shume games Jensha.
I'm feeling a bit out of sorts. I don't have much energy, but I'm probably okay. I'll feel better as I go along. Now, in the year of the rat, in 1360, on the 12th month, Karmapa Rinpoche came to the Yuan capital of Taidu, which is the present-day Beijing. And when he arrived there, he stayed at a place called the Blue Temple. So, no, I'm not certain what the Blue Temple is called in Chinese. No, he gave empowerments to the emperor and the crown prince. He gave the emperor empowerments of Vajrayogini and the teachings, including the 6 yogas of Naropa and the co-emergent yoga of Mahamudra. He gave the crown prince, in addition to the empowerments he had given the empowerment, he gave him the empowerment of Gyalo Jatso, teachings on the 100 Dataka tales, the root commentary of the Sublime Continuum, the root commentary on the written commentary on the ornament of the sutras, and the written commentary of the Kala Chakra, and as well as the related Indian texts. He also gave to other members of the royal family, as well as to the great ministers, and as well as all of the important people and leaders and monastics among the people from the China, the Mongol, and the Uyghur, the Tangut, the Korean. So at that time, Korea at the time was in the Goryeo dynasty. This is during the Goryeo dynasty. So it's so that's called Kaori also in Chinese. So, and he also, so he taught teachings to all of these people as well as to many common people. Now, the duration of his visit was probably 3 years. No, I think it's probably actually 2 years if it was over the course of 3 different calendar years. That is the length that he stayed. And one day, Karmapa Rinpoche said to the Gugong Rinchen Pal, he said a dream that the political situation of the Yuan dynasty is not so good, it's not so stable, and that the emperor will not live much longer. And so because he had that dream, so even if we continue to stay, there's nothing we can do to stop these, to prevent these bad situations from occurring. So we should make strong requests to return to Tibet. And as we return to Tibet, we can help many people along the way. And so he said this to his attendant, Gugong Rinchen Pal. And so he then made many requests to the emperor and the crown prince repeatedly. He made the request, but they didn't give permission. So one time when he was making the request, the crown prince Huang Tai then shed tears and said, "Precious Guru, please, absolutely, please stay no matter what. Hold us with compassion," he said. So the crown prince, so this is the first time that the Yuan that a member of the Yuan dynasty shed tears for the Karmapa. Then the two ministers, and they're probably among the better ministers, the greatest. They came to the Karmapa, they prostrated him, kneeled before him, and made the request. And they said, "And Guru, from the time you've arrived until now, then all the epidemics in the kingdom have stopped. The crown prince had a son. Now, at that time, is the end of the Yuan dynasty. So at that time, there, from all sorts of different directions, there were a lot of conflicts and rebellions happening from many different regions. And so during the time that Ronpo Dorje was there, the rebellions were subsided for a time, and the continuum became more prosperous. And the emperor and the crown prince had both requested him to stay with tears in their eyes. What the common people call you to is the auspicious guru who brings good crops, because at that time the crops the crops grew well, so they called him the auspicious guru who called them the good crops. This is really all a good sign. And so in a situation like this, in a time like this, so why are you so insistent on going back to Tibet? And so wouldn't it be better if, like the Dzogchen Chögyal Papa and the Emperor Sechen, Sechen is, what was his name? I've forgotten his name. My brain isn't working so well today. Sechen Gebel has a name. Sechen Emperor had named. So one was the emperor and one was the king, and they had a very said that he should have a relationship of the emperor and the teacher, and they should spread the teachings like that. So please think about this carefully. They also said he should engage in political activities. Ronpo Dorje said he gave things. He said you've made a very good, you've made a very nice request, but one day, then at the time there was a but he says sometimes, like when you have when you're having a sporting event and when everyone gets together, sometimes it's better to put an end to the spectacle. Otherwise, at the end, there's no one left if you continue to play. He said, I have done services and supplicated the three jewels on the behalf of the emperor and the crown prince, but I don't have any need at all for decrees or ranks related to political affairs, nor do I have any skills related to that. Monks should go wherever it's best and just do whatever he can to, for the sake of the teachings and sentient beings. If a monk stays in any one place and gets attached to that country, that's not good. So a good practitioner is one who is not attached to any country. And the two ministers really felt like there was a lot to learn from his words, and they actually recorded them in writing. And they saw Gugong Rinzhengpo saw them writing them down. So because he said he requested so earnestly they should return to Tibet. So he said that he was allowed to go for a period, but then in the future he'd have to return. And they also gave him many gifts to go, and they made arrangements for the travel, like horses and supplies and so forth. And now, before Karmapa Ronpo Dorje went back to Uzang, at that time in Uzang, there were the great gurus and the important people. He requested the emperor to grant letters and ranks and so forth for these people. And so at that time, there was a really great service, because at that time, at the time in Tibet, if you had the support of the Tibetan of the Chinese emperor, then your power would continue from generation after generation. Without that, then your descendants would weaken over the generations. Likewise, there was the monastery of Dzogchen Chögyal Papa in Nintao, and he asked to give that the Khenpo Palden Chok of that monastery be given the title of Pakshi and a crystal stamp. And so this is and also there's the first Lord of Paktrut in Chanchen Gyaltsen. So this is the time when he'd first taken political control in Tibet. So what Kamachinapa says is that someone had come from Tibet to slander him or to say various things about him to the Yuan emperor, to speak badly of him. And Ropa Dorje helped explain the situation to the Yuan emperor and cleared up the matter. So the Lord of the Paktu had nothing to worry of anymore. And so he had been worried that the emperor might send an army or so forth, but he no longer had to worry about that. But Rupa Dorje also requested that he be given the title of Taisitu for him, and so and so he was granted that. And so this is a great assistance for the Lord of Paktu. And so after when the Paktu had taken power, then the Sakya declined. So at that time, so Ropa Dorje also made a Dharma connection, received teachings from the Sakya Lama Dampa Tsunam Johnson, just helping praise and elevate him. And so this is also a really great benefit for the Sakyas. Likewise, 50 years before Ropa Dorje's birth, in Utsang, there had been a local rebellion of Drikung and the Drikung. Now, I don't need to speak about this in detail, but many people were killed. It's like it's not much to say about it, that other people were killed. And so from that time, there was a great feud and resentment between the Sakyas and the Drikung. And so Ropa Dorje helped resolve the feud and rebuild the Drikung monastery and so forth. And so Ropa Dorje helped spent some, made great offerings for that. And so he was also very helpful for the Drikung Kaju. Similarly, he also made requests on the, to the emperor to benefit all of the great monasteries and great lamas within Tibet. And so when he came back from Beijing, he came through the region of Tangut, or Western Xia, and they got to the region of Kangsu. When he was staying in Gansu province, many people came to see him, right? Now, some of them had traveled for up to a month, coming on horse or on camel. And so at that time, so Ropa Dorje himself would do his meditation every morning and his prayers every morning. And so other than that, and when he was eating his meals, he was always giving blessings all day long. It was like giving the empowerments with his hands and so forth. And so there's 19 days from daybreak in the morning until the sunset in the evening. So he did this continuously for 19 days. And for most people to do this for 19 days without a break, you'd get very tired. But Ropa Dorje said that he did this without any difficulty for many, many people. And then at that time, when I was staying in Gansu province, so this sits in the area of Gansu province. So in the region that is a little bit larger than the current Gansu province, but in that region, so at one time there was a large epidemic, and that similar to our COVID-19 epidemic. Well, it's similar. There was a large epidemic in the Gansu region, and many people died. And when many people were dying at that time, Gansu was also staying at the time in Gansu, so the attendants were also really very worried about it and thought there might be a danger. And so Guogong Rinpoche said that there's this great danger of the epidemic. So what should we do? Karmapa said, well, tonight I can have a lucid dream and see if I can do something about it. But don't wake me up. Because he was going off in his dream, right? So I said, don't wake me up. So after the Karmapa finished his evening meditation prayers, Then in the middle of the night, so probably like midnight, 12 o'clock, 12 o'clock or 1 a.m. So he went to sleep then. And at that time, Gogong Rinpoche stayed up watching while staying awake. Now, all of these secret all of these secret things were taught to Gogong Rinpoche because Gogong Rinpoche was always, he was inseparable from the Karmapa. So he knew everything that happened, but no one else knew about these because he said, don't tell anyone else. He said, don't tell anyone. Then one time, he's saying, so he started to write them down, thinking that would be benefit of people for the future, and the Karmapa wouldn't let him. And so he said, because in the future, people will not believe. And if they don't believe, then they're going to lose faith. And if they lose faith, then they'll fall into hell. And so this is not good. And this is what the Karmapa said. Then one time, another Lama said, thought you should write a story, the amazing liberation story of the Karmapa. And you got all the paper and the ink. And the Karmapa said, bring me all the paper and ink. And when they brought it, then he threw all the paper into fire. You're about to lie about me. You're going to tell false stories about me. And if you write that, then in the future, and no one in the future is going to believe. And if they write things that people won't believe, then I also become become false, and people are going to follow in the left. So he would fall to hell. So he wouldn't allow any write about the motto. And so the reason why we have a few stories about some of his miraculous events is that after Gogong thought to himself that if he so just a couple of them, then it would help other sentient beings, and he couldn't say it couldn't bear not to him. So just a couple. So that night, the Karmapa went to believe, and Gogong stayed awake and stayed on watch, so that no one else would come and wake up the Karmapa. And so just before sunrise, it's like this. There was like big clappings and booming sounds, as if the building was about to collapse. Like talk, and all these these really loud sounds. When those loud sounds happened, then immediately Rinpoche woke up. And when he woke up, he said to Gogong Rinpoche, did anything happen above the house? And did everything? And Rinpoche said, oh, yes, it did. It sounded like there's such loud noise that I thought the house was about to collapse. Oh, if that's how it is, the Karmapa said, then the epidemic will not come to this region. It won't happen this, and even the places where it is, it's going to go away. It'll stop. And Gogong Rinpoche says, how's that? What happened? What did you do to make it so that to end the epidemic? And at that time, Rinpoche said, when he was asleep, he saw that the people who were sending the images were a lot of monsters. And the main one was a big, large, dark goddess, a huge dark goddess, of a sort of frenzied goddess. And so what the Karmapa said is, I said that I became a huge Garuda bird with two wings that were so large that I could cover the entire Gansu province. I imitated myself as that. And so I swallowed all of the monsters and goddesses who were causing the dream, and I swallowed them all. And I had a blazing fire in my belly, and I burnt them into ashes. And then I had the feeling that I had defecated them all. And then after I defecated, then I was in the form of the grotto. I landed on the top of the building. Actually, this is a mental emanation. So it's strange that there are so many sounds at the outside, because it's a mental emanation, so there's no form. But there was all the loud sounds, and he said that was kind of strange. but don't tell anyone about this, he says. So the actual situation was that the epidemic died down in Gansu, and everyone then became healthy. So while he was staying in Gansu, a lot of people came to make offerings. He received 5,700 horses and also oxen, gold and silver, silk, and other offerings beyond count. So many people came to give him offerings, and all the offerings he sent all the offerings to Uzang to make offerings to all the monasteries in Uansong with 10 or more monks to make 7 servings of tea and other offerings to this. And he sent a lama named Ryo Gampa to Uansong to do this. So at that time, and so at that time, almost all the monasteries had like at least 10 monks, right? So he made all of the offerings to them. So from that time until the 10th Karmapa, and so from all the Karmapas up to the time of the 10th, there was a great tradition of the making offerings to all of the monks of Dharma offerings to all of the different monasteries. Many of the Karmapas, when they were about to pass away, and so this time the Karmapa Rinpoche Dorje also, without any bias or sectarianism, made offerings to all of the different monasteries and paid respect to them. And so I think this is an example of this wonderful tradition. Now, when he came to the region, as he left Gansu, came to the region of Tsongkha in the east. And so according to this is the time when he met Lord Tsongkhapa. So this time Lord Tsongkhapa was very young. And so at that time he gave him the novice vows and said, in the future you will need to go to central Tibet. He said, you need to go to Uzang. And so later Tsongkhapa did go to Uzang. And then he had the activity of becoming like a second Buddha for the teachings in Tibet. And so then the Rinpoche Dorje told him, he said, if you do not stay here but go to central Tibet, then your activity will flourish there, as it is said. But in some stories said that he also gave him the novice vows and gave him the name Kunga Nyingpo. Now, as Rinpoche Dorje was returning to Tibet, he met Lord Tsongkhapa, who at that time was very young. So time out that there were a lot of people in the areas of different regions of Tsongkha who asked him to make to found a monastery and to stay there, but he did not accept. And then he went to the area of Kansu, to the city, what we call the Kansu Wu in these days. It's an area that we call what's called Shaltripede. So in that area, he went to now I'm not sure about there's a monastery called Yutang, but if we translate into Tibetan, it's called the Bowl of Cream. And that's it. There's a beautiful spot there. They followed a mountain retreat called Paltsotra. And when he was there, then there was a lady. She was a lord and lady, right? So she was the wives of lords are called ladies, right? So this lady she had a dream, and in her dream, it said, build an image of the Buddha equal in size to a mountain, and you will. And this will fulfill the intentions of the great Prince Ratna. So this is probably, I haven't been able to find all the details on this, but this is a very wealthy patron. And so this lady, this great Prince Ratnadana had passed away, and so for the deceased prince, she should definitely do this. And so she said, please, Your Holiness, please find a way to do this. And no, they looked at it, so they all went to this place and they went to go see what the mountains are doing. If you have to make something the size of the mountain, you have to go first and see what size the mountain is. And it's an enormous mountain. It's enormous. Oh, when they saw the mountain, then everyone was like astounded. It's like their eyes were rolling. They're just shaking their heads. Oh, there's no way. Can't be doing. How can you make an image of the Buddha as big as this mountain? They're just shaking their heads. And there wasn't even a single person who said, oh, there's a way to do it. At that time, the Karmapa Rinpoche smiled a bit and he said, there is a way. What you need to do, you need to make a large applique image of the Buddha out of silk. And if you do that, you sew it all together, right? And the Lamna thought, oh, this is something I can do. And she got all the gurus and the lords and the tailors and other craftspeople together. And I said, we need to do this. We need to make a mountain-sized applique image of the Buddha. When they said that, now at that time, now most of the traders were Chinese, and they're really very intelligent. But it's such a huge, as an enormous size. The idea of the Buddha, the size of the mountain, they just couldn't even get an idea of how to do it. It's like, there's no way we can do it. How can we make this? There's no way we can do it, they said. Because you need to make the design, right? Before you do it, you have to make the announcement. It's too big for them to figure out how to do it. They didn't know what to do. And so she goes back to see Karmapa Rinpoche and said, now what should I do? And the craftspeople aren't even able to build it. What should we do? And Rinpoche said, oh, there's no problem. I'll do something. I'll take care of it. I'll lay it out for you on the ground. That's what he said is. And so when you have a river rocks, they're white, right? They're very soft and round, right? Smooth, round rocks. And he brought many things. And he brought how many people? They're fist-sized walked rocks, the size of the fist, right? So he had many people bring these rocks. And they went and they had them arrange the rocks on the side of the mountain. What it says in the Feast for Scholars is the Dharma history. It says this is probably an oral history. It's not necessarily the actual history. At that time, Rinpoche Dorje was riding a horse. And the horses have hooves, right? And so wherever the horse left a print, you should put a white rock there. And so as he rode his horse around, going around it in a circle, the people put a rock in every hoof print. And so when they finished, then they had the design of the Buddha. And so that way they did this, and they said, now you should make it this size, in these proportions. And so if you do it in this size and proportions, it'll be just right, he said. And they said, take that as a base, and they make them so the silk. And then you'll see the body and the retin, the ornaments and accoutrements, everything will be. You don't need to worry at all. So he made it, so this was like he rode the horse and putting down the things. He didn't, riding the horse. As one said, they didn't measure like we do these. They said, how many meters is it? How many centimeters? He didn't do it like that. Oh, it's going to be really expensive. And because it's going to be so expensive. And so he's going to take, and he said he would give a tenth of the expense. So that's 10% or a tenth of the expense. And so he gave her 1,900 sang of silver. That's a 900 sang of silver. I don't know how many ounces of silver that is. I couldn't calculate it today because there wasn't time. In any case, Rinpoche Dorje had created the whole design for the tanka, and then the lady ordered the 500 tailors she gave them the fabric and the silk, and they made them and had them sew the image. So now how large was the image? From the ears, right? From the right ear to the left ear, there was 11 arm strands. See, there's the people at the right side. This is basically the size of 11 people. so they made and so they had an image of the Buddha sitting in cross-legged. Then on his right was Manjushri, on his left was Maitreya, both of them standing. Below them there was a citizen, then citizen above there the gods and goddesses making offerings. And the side they had the silk frame and so forth, and they spread it on the hillside, right? And then on a day with good astrological signs, the Roger was brought to bless, to consecrate it. And on that day, there are also some miraculous signs, such as rainbows and shining lights, tremors of the earth, a rain of flowers, and so forth. So unless I show this to you, you aren't going to understand it, right?
So
this is a painting I've drawn, or an illustration of it, so that it'd be easy for you to see. So I think this is like the great silken tanka that they made. It's probably like that. Now the length of it was probably similar in size to the Statue of Liberty in New York City. Now, not just the tuka, but it's probably the size of the entire tanka. In China, this would be the sign of the Nanhai Kuan-yi Avalokiteshvara statue in Hainan. So at that time, it was like incredibly huge. So after they had made it, they offered it to the Rebbe Dorje. So when they given it, they had to bring it back to Tibet. So he brought it back to Tibet. So what it says in the Feast for Scholars, the Dharma history, is that the Buddha statue, the Buddha image was separated into 32 packages, and there are 8 packages for each of the side panels. And so, now the Liberation Story by Karma Kanshun said that is that it had to be loaded on 44 zos, that is yak and cattle crosses. And then behind that they had 22 other spines, and so they had other 22 others behind, ready to be loaded, because the zos couldn't carry it the entire time, and so they had over 60 or 70 zos. Probably just under 70 zos to carry the tanka. And once they'd arrived into the 2 side panels, one was given to Jikung and was given to the Paktru monastery. And the main Buddha image was kept at Shoka and Kombo. Kombo Shoka, there's a monastery there, and that's where it was kept. But later it was damaged by fire. And so the different parts, they were all taken into pieces. And so there are 5 panels from the center of this that were missing. And so Kombucha Junza had them remade at Sehlagang. But the rest of it was kept at Shokalhagang. And the rest were up in Sehlagang. So if we said, if we don't worry about things, so it's not, because the upper part of the body was in Sehlagang, the lower part is in Shoka, and said that the interdependence of this would create some difficulties with the Kamsang. So it's important that this all be kept in one location, according to Pao Tsula Chengwa. So what is this difficulty that arises for the Karma Kamsan? Is it during the time of the 8th Karmapa, there were 2 reincarnations of the 4th Shamar. And it was the Karma Kamsan was almost about to split into 2 schisms. It was a big conflict, a big controversy. And so that must have been what was meant, they thought. In any case, this great silk tanka is probably the first image of a large silk applique image of the Buddha in Tibetan history. And so the person who started this tradition was therefore probably Karmapa Rinpoche Dorje. So where is it now? Where is the great silk tanka? It is not there. So it doesn't exist anymore. If I've seen this in one history, when the armies of Kushi Khan arrived in Kongpo, there's this huge silk image. This is primarily the two side panels had gone to the other monasteries, but the actual image itself was in Kongpo, and because it was in the region of Kongpo, when the Kushi Khan's armies came up, they ripped it where they could. They ripped it apart. They burned parts of it, and they made clothes out of other parts as well. And so this is a really great disappointment. You're great. If there's something we'd actually see now, this is a really important historical artifact for for Tibetan people, and it's also a really sacred image for Buddhists. And so that is why I've had this drawing done as like an image of it, just to show you what it must have been like. It's kind of just to give you an overall idea of what it's like. And so on the top and the bottom, there's supposed to be people on the top and below, right? And Rinpoche Dorje then went to the area of Dunhuang. So these are what we call the Dunhuang caves these days. So he went there. Now, at that time in Dunhuang, there are 3,700 temples. And among them, some had been built by Chinese emperors, some by the Mongol emperors, and some had been built by the Tibetan king Tridral Pachen. So Rinpoche Dorje, when he was staying in the region of the Dunhuang Kavas, there people came to give him 100 or 1,000 offerings of horses and camels. And so at that point, there are two main images of Great Maitreya and two temples of Maitreya. So these are the most important temples. And so he gave eternal lamps that would be burnt day and night. As he gave it as the principle to support that, and also to restore the temples. And so this is showing that there's a great connection between Rinpoche Dorje and the Dunhuang monasteries. Then he went through the areas of Kham and down to Kongpo. Now, when he arrived in Kongpo, as the previous Karmapa Ranjin Dorje prophesied, he went to the sacred spot of Tsari. And he went to that main place and he opened it up. And so from that time, then many people would come to go to pilgrimage to Tsari, or there were retreatants who would stay permanently at Tsari, and it became a very important and sacred spot. And so that is when Tsari became an important retreat and sacred spot. And he also went to pilgrimage to other sacred spots in Kongpo. And then he traveled to the north, to the area of to the north in the present-day region of Ngachukpa. He said we have to go to a really clean place in Sangpa. These are areas where it's a place with very little firewood. So he said, bring as much cedar wood as they could. And so to gather as much as you can cedar and bring it along. And what he also said, the third Karmapa's Ranjin Dorje's remains was cremated with a wagon load of sandalwood and aloe wood. Now, the place where he was cremated was in the Mongol regions in China. So in sandalwood, there is no such sandalwood in Tibet. So in place of it, they used cedar. So they went to this beautiful grass-covered mountain in there, and to this place in Ngakchupa. And they said, if a pure bhikshu's body is cremated here, then the Chinese armies will not come to Tibet, he said. They set up an encampment there. And so then he also said several times, the savage beings of the Adventure Time are really difficult to tame. And no matter how much Dharma I teach them, They won't enter the path to the Dharma. They won't go along the path. So what can I do to still world weariness in them? And so he did several times. He said this several times. And so as he said, then in the water pig year, when he was the age of 44, on the third day of the 7th month, he felt a little bit unwell. And from that time on, then there were earthquakes and rainbows and rains of flowers and so forth. And from the third day until the 15th day, he circumambulated the representations of body, speech, and mind 52 times. And in the evenness, there's the aspiration for rebirth and Sukhavati that we recite all those days. So the line that says, Krit Maitre Manjushi Samanta Bhadram, Avlokitashva Masampatampa, and so forth. May you accomplish, can you accomplish great enlightenment? And so he recited the lines over and over again. So at that time they were in Changtang, so there are many animals, and so there are many wild animals who circumambulated it. And they had a large cremation up there. And so at that time, then all the animals came from all directions to watch. Later in that place where they held the cremation, they took all the rocks and stones and they made that stupa there, and it's and became a place where all the animals would gather according to Pao Tsula Chengwa. The animals would gather and circumambulate the stupa. And so that is a brief history of the story of Ropa Dorje, explained in brief. Now, Ropa Dorje had many students, many amazing students, and among them, as I mentioned before, I've been mentioned about Guogong Rinchen Pao. He was like one of the most important of his students. And he was... So when the Karmapa Rinchen Dorje was in the region of Dulung, this is an valley near Tsupo Monastery. When Rinchen Dorje was staying in that area, there were a lot of children who were gathering the livestock's dung. They're gathering it and playing in that. And then there was one of the chi that escaped from the encampment, and so all the children were afraid. And they just ran in all the directions. There was one child, he didn't flee, he didn't run away. And that time they had a basket for carrying the dung that they were carrying, right? And so he turned that upside, he sat inside, and he sat underneath it. He held it by the rope, and the key ran around it, but they couldn't bite him, and he couldn't find him. And so the dog then left. And so, what a clever child, they all thought. So everyone thought this is a really clever child. And that time, Rinchen Dorje said to the parents of that child, "Please give that child to me." And so at that time, then the parents then offered the child to Rinchen Dorje. And Rinchen Dorje said that he would have a very great influence on both politically and in terms of dharmas. And so for that time, and so that he was the Guogong. This is the highest rank of the encampment, right? The Guogong was during the time of the 13th, or the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Karmapas, and so he had very great activity at that time. And he was also someone that all of the Chinese and Mongolian princes and all the great ministers and the Tibetan leaders all paid him great respect. They would only call him the Great Master. No one would call him by his actual name, Rinchen Pa. He said that he was actually the one who had left the greatest impression, the greatest imprint on the teachings. And so he was the greatest student of. Now, it's not certain what his actual dates are, but he lived from the end of to the end of Rinchen Dorje's life. Later, he met Ropa Dorje, received many teachings from Ropa Dorje. So he was one. And sometimes I mentioned. Now, as I've been teaching about the liberation stories of Ropa Dorje, I've read several old stories on them. The Siddha Panchen wrote the Golden Garland of the Kagyu biographies, and he said, so it's pointed there's There's a life stories written by Lama Tlating. There's one by sort of Kumpamba Kunga Lodre and Toten Kacherpa. So I've seen all of these, but the longest and the one that's the basis for all of them is the one written by Karma Kunshin. So I've primarily taken that life liberation story by Karma Kunshin as the basis for my teaching today. So Karma Kunshin was someone who did meet Karmapa Ranjan Dorje, but he was primarily a student of the fourth Karmapa, Ronpa Dorje. He studied at the first Tibetan Shadow, which is called Sampo, and became a very learned scholar. And so there was one time when Rinpoche, Shuddha Lodra, Kyabche Palsang, and Tsongkhapa Lobsang Dorje gathered, they had a great world of Dharma, and what they primarily taught us, the person who primarily taught it was Karma Kunshin. There was also the So it's like the Kunshin Yapa was enrolled with the greater master as the teachings on the ornament of clear realization, Prajan Panuta. And the place where the person from whom they learned of the great masters was from Karma Kunshin. But Karma Kunshin his primary places was at a place called Karma Tingwe. And so for that reason, he's probably called, and I think that's why it's probably called Karma Kunshin. So he stayed at the top of the Karmapa monastery, and so that is why it's called the Kunshin. Riding the jewels is a literal translation. And so what he's now, but of course, for the main student of the second was the second Shama Rinpoche, Kaja Wompo. Yes, he was the second. The second, so the second Shama Kaja Wompo was the main disciple of the fourth Karmapa Rinpoche. So that is a brief description of the life of Rinpoche Dorje. And when you talk about the Great Encampment, you have to talk about Rinpoche Dorje. And so there's several reasons. The first, as I mentioned before, the primary sacred object of the Great Encampment was the gondola that came during the time of Rinpoche Dorje, and also a great. One particular feature of the Great Encampment is the rule that you should not eat meat or drink alcohol. Now, of course, all monasteries have the rule against drinking alcohol, but not eating meat is very difficult in Tibet. You didn't have vegetables to eat the way you do. You didn't have any greens to eat. So if you were not allowed to eat meat, then it's basically saying that you couldn't eat food. That's the situation at that time. But in the Great Encampment, there was the rule against eating meat, and that rule began at the time of the fourth Karmapa Rinpoche Dorje, right? Similarly, within the Great Encampment, there are many rules that record with the Dharma, and so it's probably influence or related to Rinpoche Dorje's intentions. And so, for that reason, I thought to give some sort of background information about the Great Encampment in relation to Rinpoche Dorje's biography. And so now in the next week, I'd like to speak about the form of the encampment and the regulations of that. So I think that is enough for today. So now we will have the closing prayers.
本主瑞给也与人小本主。